Imagine a time long ago when women's voices were often silenced and their rights were limited. Yet, in the midst of this ancient society, a group of 5 sisters stood tall and bravely challenged the system. The daughters of Zelophehad, faced with the loss of their family's inheritance, chose to trust in God's justice and took a step that would forever change the laws of Israel. Their bold act was not only a demonstration of faith, but a quiet revolution for the rights of women. In this journey through their story, we will uncover the deep spiritual truths behind their actions and how their courage, persistence, and faith in God can teach us powerful lessons for our lives today. You will discover how their petition to Moses set a precedent that went beyond their personal inheritance, and how God's response was a resounding declaration of his fairness and care for all his children, regardless of gender. As we dive into this story, let your heart be open to the message of hope and justice. God's justice transcends all societal norms, and he is always working to bring about fairness, even in the most unexpected ways. Join us as we explore how the courage of 5 sisters from an ancient time can inspire us to stand firm in faith, act with boldness, and trust in God's perfect justice. Zelophehad, the central figure in one of the Bible's most impactful stories of justice and equity, was a man from the tribe of Manasseh, one of the tribes of Israel. He died in the wilderness without leaving any sons, which, according to the inheritance laws of that time, meant that his property would be lost to his family. However, his story did not end with his death, for it was through his daughters that a significant transformation in Israel's inheritance laws was brought about. Zelophehad's name became synonymous with change and divine justice. Zelophehad's 5 daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, faced an uncertain future without the protection that their father's inheritance would have provided. In the context of the patriarchal society of their time, the loss of land meant not only economic insecurity, but also a loss of dignity and social standing. The situation of Zelophehad's daughters illustrates one of the oldest and most challenging dilemmas women have faced: the struggle for their rights in a male-dominated culture. But Zelophehad's daughters did not resign themselves to the fate they had been given. They believed in the justice of God and had the courage to present their case before Moses, the high priest Eleazar, and the entire assembly of Israel. By standing before the leaders of their people, they were not just asking for a portion of their father's inheritance. They were challenging the laws that excluded women from fundamental rights. It was an act of faith and profound trust in God's just nature. The story of Zelophehad and his daughters teaches an important lesson about the power of courageous faith. They not only believed that God would hear their plea, but also that he would be just in his response. They dared to ask for what many would not have even considered, because they believed that God, above all, is a God of justice. The conviction that God's mercy and justice were not bound by gender drove them forward. This act of faith was more than a personal request. It became a turning point in Israel's laws. From that point on, women, under certain circumstances, could inherit their father's property. Zelophehad's legacy is therefore a milestone on the path toward equality, not only in legal terms, but also in spiritual terms, as it demonstrates God's willingness to listen and respond to all his children, regardless of gender. The story of Zelophehad and his daughters continues to resonate deeply with people of faith today. It is a testament that even in the midst of systems that seem unchangeable, God can bring transformation. His daughters were not bound by fear or tradition, but moved forward, knowing that God is always faithful and just. And thus, Zelophehad's name remains in history, not only as a legacy of land, but as a legacy of faith and courage. After the death of Zelophehad, his daughters found themselves in a situation that was not only unusual, but deeply concerning. In ancient Israel, inheritance was passed down through the male lineage. Without a male heir, their father's land would either revert to his brothers or be absorbed by the tribe, leaving the daughters without the security that the inheritance would have provided. This posed a profound dilemma. How could they, as women, secure their future in a society that traditionally excluded them from such rights? The dilemma faced by Zelophehad's daughters was one that women throughout history have known all too well. They were powerless in the face of the law, unable to claim what rightfully belonged to their family simply because they were women. This loss of inheritance symbolized more than just the loss of land. It represented the systemic exclusion of women from positions of power and stability. For them, it was a crisis not just of wealth, but of identity and dignity. Yet, even in the midst of their dilemma, the daughters of Zelophehad did not allow themselves to be overcome by fear or hopelessness. Instead of accepting their fate, they saw an opportunity to bring about change. They knew the significance of their father's inheritance, and they believed that it was unjust for them to be excluded from it simply because they were not men. This moment of decision required boldness, as they chose to confront the cultural norms that had long oppressed women. The daughters' dilemma was not just a personal issue, it had implications for the future of all women in Israel. If they remained silent, the laws of inheritance would continue to favor men, leaving future generations of women in similar situations of powerlessness. But if they spoke out, they could open the door for a new understanding of justice and fairness in their community. This was not merely about a piece of land, it was about standing up for what was right and creating a precedent that would benefit many others. Their decision to act in faith and speak out against the injustice they faced is an inspiring example of courage. Even when the odds seemed stacked against them, they were determined to fight for their inheritance. They trusted that God, who is always just, would hear their case. The daughters of Zelophehad serve as a reminder that faith is not passive. It often requires us to step out in boldness and trust that God will guide us toward justice. Their story resonates with anyone who has ever felt excluded or marginalized. It teaches that no matter how deeply entrenched the systems of injustice may seem, God's justice is greater. The daughters of Zelophehad remind us that faith, when combined with courage, can overcome even the most formidable obstacles. And in doing so, they set a powerful example for future generations of believers. The decision of Zelophehad's daughters to approach Moses and the leaders of Israel was nothing short of extraordinary. In a time when women had little to no voice in public matters, these 5 women boldly stepped forward, confident that their plea would be heard. They were not just petitioning for their personal rights, but were asking for a shift in the very fabric of their society. This act of faith required remarkable courage, as they were challenging long-standing traditions and laws that had favored men for generations. Standing before Moses, the high priest Eleazar, and the entire assembly of Israel, the daughters of Zelophehad spoke with clarity and conviction. They did not demand justice with bitterness or anger, but with faith in God's righteousness. They presented their case in a way that highlighted not only the personal loss they were facing, but also the broader issue of fairness in Israel. By doing so, they turned what could have been a simple plea for inheritance into a powerful moment of advocacy for women's rights. Their petition was a reflection of their deep belief in God's justice. They knew that the laws of men were not always in line with God's will, and they trusted that He would be faithful to uphold what was right. By approaching Moses, they were demonstrating that true faith sometimes requires bold action. It was not enough to pray quietly or hope for change. They had to stand up and make their voices heard. This was not a defiant act, but one rooted in a profound trust that God's justice transcends human limitations. Moses, upon hearing their request, could have easily dismissed them, adhering to the established laws of inheritance. But instead, he did something remarkable. He brought their case before the Lord. Moses recognized the significance of their petition, understanding that this was not just a legal issue, but a matter of justice that needed divine wisdom. The humility of Moses in seeking God's guidance set the stage for a monumental shift in how women were viewed in the laws of Israel. This moment was not just about 5 women asking for their inheritance. It was about faith in action. The daughters of Zelophehad serve as a powerful example of how faith is not passive. True faith often requires us to stand up, to speak out, and to trust that God will meet us in our boldness. Their courage reminds us that God is always ready to listen to the cries of His people, no matter how impossible the situation may seem. If this message has touched your heart, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments, or if you prefer, comment the word justice to let us know that you stand with us in this journey of faith and righteousness. Together, we can reflect on how God calls each of us to act courageously for justice and fairness in our own lives. When Moses heard the plea of Zelophehad's daughters, he faced a significant decision. In a society where inheritance laws had always favored men, their request challenged the very fabric of tradition. Instead of relying solely on human wisdom or existing laws, Moses did something that demonstrated his deep trust in God. He took their case before the Lord. This action was a testament to his humility as a leader, knowing that he needed divine guidance to make the right decision in this unprecedented situation. Moses' role in this story is pivotal. As a leader, he had the authority to simply uphold the existing laws, dismissing the daughters' petition. However, his willingness to seek God's direction reveals his deep commitment to justice. Moses understood that leadership was not about enforcing rigid rules, but about ensuring that God's will was done among his people. By bringing the case before the Lord, Moses demonstrated that even the most established laws should be subject to divine wisdom. When God responded to Moses, he did something extraordinary. He declared that the daughters of Zelophehad were right. God not only validated their claim, but also instituted a new law for all of Israel. From that point forward, if a man died without a son, his inheritance would pass to his daughters. This divine decision marked a profound shift in the treatment of women in Israel, establishing a new precedent for justice and fairness. Moses' role as the intermediary between God and the people highlights the importance of seeking divine guidance in matters of justice. His humility in bringing the case before God ensured that the decision made was not based on societal norms, but on God's eternal principles of righteousness. It's a reminder that when we are faced with difficult decisions, we should always seek God's wisdom, trusting that He will lead us in the way of justice. This divine ruling was not just a victory for Zelophehad's daughters. It was a victory for every woman in Israel who might find herself in a similar situation. The decision established that God's justice extends beyond human tradition, and that He is always concerned with fairness for all His children. It was a moment that reflected God's care for the marginalized and His willingness to listen to those who dare to seek justice in His name. Moses' leadership in this moment serves as an example for all of us. When we are faced with challenges or situations that seem unfair, we must remember to seek God's wisdom and trust that He will guide us to the right decision. Just as Moses turned to the Lord, so too should we rely on God to direct our steps in moments of uncertainty and to ensure that justice is done. God's response to the petition of Zelophehad's daughters was not only remarkable, but transformative. When Moses brought their case before the Lord, God affirmed the righteousness of their request. This moment was significant because it demonstrated that God's justice is not limited by human traditions or societal norms. By ruling in favor of the daughters, God established a new law that changed the course of history for the women of Israel. This divine ruling reflected God's heart for fairness and his deep concern for the rights of all his children. The new law that God gave through Moses was simple yet revolutionary. From that moment forward, if a man died without leaving a son, his daughters would inherit his property. This law provided security for women in a society where inheritance and land ownership were critical to survival. It also gave women a new sense of dignity and worth, as they were now recognized as rightful heirs in their families. This shift in the law marked a powerful moment of inclusion and equality. God's response was more than just an answer to the specific case of Zelophehad's daughters. It was a statement about his character. It showed that God values justice and fairness above all, and that he is willing to make changes to ensure that his people are treated with equity. The fact that God was willing to alter the laws of inheritance to protect the rights of women is a testament to his compassion and his desire for all of his children to experience justice. This new law did more than protect the daughters of Zelophehad. It set a precedent for future generations. Women who might have found themselves in similar situations could now point to this law as a safeguard of their rights. It was a breakthrough in a patriarchal society, offering protection and provision for women who otherwise might have been overlooked or marginalized. Through this law, God was creating a path for greater justice in Israel. The establishment of this new law also serves as a reminder that God is always attentive to the needs of the vulnerable. The daughters of Zelophehad were not powerful or influential, yet God heard their cry and acted on their behalf. His response was swift and just, ensuring that their needs were met and their future secured. This is a powerful reflection of God's heart for those who are often forgotten or ignored by society. God's response to this situation continues to resonate today. It reminds us that God's justice is timeless and that he is always working to ensure that his people are treated fairly. The story of Zelophehad's daughters shows us that God is willing to intervene in systems of injustice and bring about change, even when it seems impossible. His new law for Israel stands as a lasting testimony to his unwavering commitment to justice. The decision made in favor of Zelophehad's daughters was more than just a legal ruling. It had profound cultural implications for Israel. At a time when women's roles were largely confined to the household, this new law granted them a voice in areas that had traditionally been reserved for men. The fact that God himself had instituted this change showed the people of Israel that women were not to be overlooked or ignored in matters of justice and fairness. This was a monumental step toward recognizing the dignity and worth of women in a patriarchal society. For many women in Israel, this ruling was a breakthrough. It was a sign that their concerns mattered and that they, too, were seen as valuable members of the community. The daughters of Zelophehad, by stepping forward and seeking justice, had opened a door for other women to realize their rights and claim their inheritance. The impact of this moment would ripple through generations, gradually shifting the cultural view of women's roles in both family and society. This change was not only legal, but also spiritual. It challenged long-held assumptions about gender and inheritance, prompting deeper reflections on the nature of God's justice. By allowing women to inherit, God was signaling that his concern for justice extended to all, regardless of gender. It was a reminder that the laws of men, while important, must always be aligned with the higher principles of God's righteousness. In this way, the cultural impact of this ruling transcended the specifics of inheritance and spoke to the broader issue of equality. Over time, this moment would be seen as a turning point in the history of Israel. Although the change was gradual, The new law began to shift the way women were perceived in the community. No longer were they just passive recipients of decisions made by men. They were active participants in the legal and social framework of the nation. This new understanding of women's rights, grounded in God's divine justice, was a powerful force for cultural transformation. The courage of Zelophehad's daughters also set a powerful example for other women. Their willingness to speak out against the norms of their time inspired countless others to seek justice in their own lives. They proved that women, too, could act in faith and be heard by both human leaders and by God Himself. This cultural shift empowered women to see themselves not as secondary or lesser, but as valuable and capable members of the community. This cultural impact of the daughters' bold petition continues to be relevant today. Their story is a reminder that change often begins with a single voice, willing to speak out against injustice. It encourages us to challenge the norms that oppress or exclude others and to seek fairness in all areas of life. The legacy of Zelophehad's daughters is not just one of legal reform. It is a testimony to the enduring power of faith, courage, and the pursuit of justice. Zelophehad's daughters hold a unique and pivotal role in the Bible, not just for their legal petition, but for the lasting impact they left on the history of Israel. Their story is one of the few in the Old Testament where women are at the forefront of societal change, and it's clear that their boldness and faith had far-reaching effects. These women, despite living in a culture that often marginalized them, became trailblazers who shaped the laws and the spiritual understanding of their nation. Their role in biblical history goes beyond their personal gain. It represents a broader movement toward justice and equality in God's kingdom. The courage of Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah in approaching Moses and the leaders of Israel was an act of faith that showed a deep understanding of God's character. Their plea wasn't merely for themselves, it was a call for fairness that would benefit all women who found themselves in similar circumstances. Their role in the Bible illustrates that faith isn't just a private matter, but can be a catalyst for systemic change. By stepping forward, they challenged the status quo and demonstrated that God's justice was available to all His people, not just the privileged. In biblical history, Zelophehad's daughters stand as a testament to the power of persistence and the importance of seeking justice no matter the barriers. They were not prophets or queens, yet their faith moved mountains. They proved that ordinary people, when driven by a deep sense of right and wrong, can influence laws, culture, and history. Their actions remind us that God can use anyone, regardless of their societal standing, to bring about His purposes. Moreover, their story set a precedent in the legal system of Israel, forever changing how inheritance laws were viewed. Women were now recognized as valid heirs under certain conditions, a concept that would have been unthinkable in many ancient cultures. This shift in the law was a direct result of the daughters' boldness and determination. Their role in biblical history is a reminder that God's plans often involve those who are willing to take risks and stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Zelophehad's daughters also play an important role in the lineage of Israel. Their inheritance allowed them to carry on their father's name and legacy, ensuring that their family would continue to have a place in the Promised Land. This was not just a legal victory, but a spiritual one, as it affirmed their inclusion in God's covenant promises. Their role in securing this inheritance highlights the importance of faith in action and how God honors those who trust in His justice. In the broader context of biblical history, the story of Zelophehad's daughters is a profound example of how God works through unexpected individuals to bring about His divine will. Their role is one of empowerment, faith, and the relentless pursuit of justice. They remind us that every believer, regardless of their status or gender, has the potential to leave a lasting mark on history when they follow God's call for righteousness. The story of Zelophehad's daughters offers timeless lessons on faith and perseverance that continue to inspire believers today. Their boldness in approaching Moses and the leaders of Israel was rooted in an unwavering belief that God is just and that He cares about the rights of the marginalized. This faith-driven courage teaches us that when we face challenges or injustices, we should stand firm in our belief that God sees us and hears our cries. Even when circumstances seem insurmountable, the example of these women reminds us to persevere, trusting that God will guide us toward justice. One of the key lessons from their story is that faith requires action. The daughters of Zelophehad could have remained silent, resigned to their fate, but instead they chose to take a bold step forward. Their faith wasn't passive. It moved them to speak out in pursuit of what was right. This is a powerful reminder that our faith should also be active. We are called to act in faith, to take steps toward justice, and to trust that God will meet us there, just as He did for these courageous women. Perseverance is another central theme in their story. The cultural and legal systems of their time were stacked against them, yet they didn't allow this to deter their pursuit of justice. Their persistence in seeking a fair inheritance is a reminder that perseverance in the face of adversity is a key aspect of faith. Sometimes, change takes time, and obstacles may seem overwhelming, but like Zelophehad's daughters, we are called to keep pushing forward, trusting that God's justice will prevail in the end. Their story also speaks to the importance of trusting in God's timing. When Moses brought their case before the Lord, God responded with a new law that forever changed the rights of women in Israel. This divine intervention teaches us that God's timing is perfect. Though we may not always see immediate results, we can rest in the assurance that God is at work behind the scenes, bringing about His justice in ways that we may not fully understand at the moment. The faith and perseverance of these women also encourage us to seek justice for others. Their petition wasn't just about personal gain, it was about creating a new path for other women in similar situations. Their courage reminds us that when we fight for justice, we're not only standing up for ourselves, but we are also paving the way for future generations. As believers, we are called to be advocates for those who are voiceless and to persevere in our efforts to bring God's justice to a world in need. Finally, their story teaches us that God honors those who trust Him enough to act in faith. The daughters of Zelophehad weren't afraid to approach the leaders of Israel because they believed that God would be just. Their faith was rewarded with a new law that protected their rights and the rights of many others. This powerful example encourages us to trust that God sees our efforts and honors those who seek His justice with perseverance and faith. The actions of Zelophehad's daughters initiated what can be seen as a silent revolution in the history of Israel. Their boldness in standing before Moses and the assembly didn't result in loud declarations or public celebrations, but it quietly transformed the future of women in their society. By securing the right to inherit their father's property, these women set a precedent that would ripple through generations. It was a moment of profound change that quietly but powerfully challenged the status quo. This revolution was silent because it did not involve a public upheaval or rebellion. Instead, it was the power of faith, persistence, and a willingness to speak up for what was right that changed the law of the land. Their actions show that revolutions can begin in the heart of a few, and through God's intervention can reshape the course of history. By standing up for their rights, the daughters of Zelophehad reshaped how society viewed women's roles and opened the door for future women to claim their place in the community. The change brought about by Zelophehad's daughters was not only legal, but also cultural. Women in Israel were often seen as dependent on male relatives for their security and survival. This new law, which allowed daughters to inherit, gave women a new level of independence and security. It quietly shifted the perception of women's value and their rightful place in society, bringing them out of the shadows and into a position of greater prominence and dignity. The revolution they sparked continues to resonate today. While their actions may not have been loud, their impact was lasting. Their story reminds us that true change often begins with a small step of courage. One voice raised in faith can inspire many others, and one act of justice can set off a chain reaction that transforms lives. This silent revolution teaches us that God often works through quiet acts of faith to bring about profound and lasting change. In this sense, the daughters of Zelophehad changed the future not just for themselves, but for all the women who would follow. Their faith and courage created new possibilities, showing that God's justice transcends societal norms. By daring to speak up, they paved the way for a more just and equitable future, not only in their own time, but for countless generations to come. This silent revolution also teaches us that God's work doesn't always have to be grand or loud to be effective. Sometimes it's the small, quiet acts of faith and justice that create the most lasting change. Zelophehad's daughters remind us that no matter how small our voices may seem, when we speak out for justice, we can trust that God is working through us to bring about His will. The story of Zelophehad's daughters is more than a historical account. It offers timeless lessons that are still relevant in today's world. Their boldness in seeking justice, their faith in God's fairness, and their perseverance in the face of societal norms provide a model for how we can live out our faith in modern life. In a world where injustice and inequality still exist, their story serves as a powerful reminder that God's justice transcends human limitations and that we are called to act courageously when faced with unfairness. One of the most important lessons we can apply from their story is the power of faith in action. Like the daughters of Zelophehad, we are often faced with challenges that seem too large or systems that seem immovable. Yet their example shows us that when we trust in God and act in faith, even the most entrenched traditions can be changed. Whether in our personal lives, our communities, or on a larger societal scale, we are reminded that faith is not passive. It compels us to stand up for what is right. Another key takeaway from their story is the importance of perseverance. The daughters of Zelophehad faced a system that excluded them, but they did not let that stop them from seeking justice. In our own lives, we are often faced with setbacks or barriers, but their persistence encourages us to keep going, trusting that God's justice will prevail. Perseverance, rooted in faith, allows us to push through difficult situations, knowing that God is working on our behalf, even when the results are not immediate. Their story also calls us to be advocates for others, especially those who are marginalized or voiceless. Just as Zelophehad's daughters sought not only their own inheritance, but also set a precedent for other women, we are called to use our voices to stand up for those who cannot speak for themselves. In a world where inequality still exists, their example teaches us that our actions can have a lasting impact on future generations. Applying their teachings to modern life also means recognizing that change is often incremental. The daughters of Zelophehad did not overturn the entire system, but their actions led to a significant shift in the laws of Israel. In the same way, we may not see immediate or dramatic results when we act for justice, but that doesn't mean our efforts are in vain. Small, faithful steps toward fairness can build up over time, creating lasting change in ways we may not fully understand. Finally, their story reminds us that God honors those who seek His justice. When we stand up for what is right, we can trust that God sees our efforts and will guide us toward His purpose. The daughters of Zelophehad did not act out of selfishness, but out of a deep belief in God's fairness. Their faith was rewarded, and their actions left a legacy that continues to inspire us today. In our own lives, we can trust that God will honor our faith when we seek His will and stand up for what is right. As we reflect on their story, let us be encouraged to live out these lessons in our own lives. May we act in faith, persevere through challenges, and advocate for justice, trusting that God's perfect will is always at work in the world around us. The story of Zelophehad's daughters is more than a narrative from the past. It is a living testimony to the power of faith, courage, and the pursuit of justice. These 5 women who dared to stand up and speak out remind us that even in a world of established traditions, God's justice can break through. Their bold petition led to a new law, but more than that, it showed how God values each of His children, regardless of gender, and how He listens to those who seek His fairness. As we reflect on their journey, we are reminded that our faith must be active, not passive. Just as these daughters trusted in God's righteousness and stepped forward in faith, we too are called to take bold steps in our own lives. Whether we face challenges in our personal lives or in the world around us, we can trust that God will meet us with His perfect justice, just as He did for Zelophehad's daughters. Let their story inspire you to act with courage in the face of adversity, to persevere when the odds seem against you, and to trust in God's timing and wisdom. Their silent revolution changed the course of history, and it all began with faith and the courage to speak out. May we learn from their example and carry the message of God's justice into our own lives, advocating for fairness and righteousness in everything we do. Before you go, I encourage you to share this message with friends and family who may need a reminder of God's justice and fairness. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an opportunity to be inspired by more stories of faith and courage. Together, we can reflect on God's timeless wisdom and apply it to our everyday lives.